in reality, we do not really have the choice to accept or not to accept God. We must ultimately accept God, assuming we choose to avoid perdition.
Are you an atheist?
Yes.
Okay, are you a materialist?
No.
Okay, so you believe in immaterial reality, that's good. How do you explain immaterial reality if there is no God?
All these followers of different religions, including yourself, are very, very confident in their views, enough to be able to assert that people in other belief systems are wrong.
Well, it's not a paradox, Nick. It's just the way truth works.
No, it is a paradox. All these people, they're not willing to address the fact that the other people across the table are equally confident. They're equally certain.
What do you mean by paradox?
We've found hundreds of planets that have the same kind of properties that Earth has, Earth-like planets. It's not that out of the ordinary for Earth to just pop up out of nowhere. We can't get to them yet.
Where are these planets? Where are these planets?
They're in our galaxy, a very small sliver of our galaxy we've been able to study. We have found these planets.
All right, great. That still doesn't change my point.
As I understood it, you've argued that a painting or a creation, to use the term painting, implies a painter, or a design implies a designer. But I must ask, who designed God? And if no one designed God, if God is timeless, spaceless, and immaterial, and he existed eternally in an uncaused fashion, then why can't nature exist in the exact same way, in an eternal, uncaused, spaceless, timeless, immaterial fashion?
Good question.
Why can't our uncaused origins be as marvelous and precise as God, but be natural causes?
Excellent question, Carter. That's a very good question. You're right that we have two options here. Either the universe is the uncaused first cause, or something beyond the universe is the uncaused first cause.
I agree.
The problem is that all the evidence points to the fact that the universe is not the uncaused first cause. And I didn't have time to go through that evidence tonight. That was part one. But I'll give it to you very briefly in an acronym, SURGE, S-U-R-G-E. S stands for the second law of thermodynamics, which says that the universe is running down. Well, if it's running down, somebody must have wound it up. We'd have no energy left right now if the universe was eternal. The U stands for the fact that the universe is expanding. Edwin Hubble detected that back in 1929 and shows that everything came from a single point, a point actually of infinite density, the singularity, which is actually nothing. So the universe had a beginning. The R in SURGE stands for the radiation afterglow. That's the remnant heat discovered by Penzias and Wilson in 1965, which is literally the smoking gun to the Big Bang. There's heat, remnant heat from the Big Bang still out there, which shows that the universe had a beginning. The G in SURGE stands for the great galaxy seeds, which were very fine temperature variations in that radiation afterglow that allowed the galaxies to form in the early universe. And the E stands for Einstein's theory of general relativity, which shows that time, space, and matter are correlative, that they came into existence together, that space, time, and matter literally had a beginning. Einstein knew this in 1916. Then observational evidence began in 1919 when Eddington did his test on the eclipse. And then Hubble discovered the expanding universe in 1929, and then on to the radiation afterglow and the great galaxy seeds after that. So the evidence points to the fact that the universe is not the uncaused first cause. So there must be something beyond the universe that is, and that thing that's beyond the universe must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial. And if you're timeless, do you have a beginning?
No.
No. So God is not, he didn't have a
Very
beginning.
pregnant
He's the
pause.
uncaused first cause. And look, Aristotle, Plato, they all knew this. They knew there had to be an unmoved mover.
I believe that you're drawing a false dichotomy, because we do not know that the original cause was God. There is no reason to say that an intelligent designer was the first cause, the uncaused first cause that caused everything else. I do not have the training or expertise to refute such science, and in fact, I accept your conclusion that the Big Bang had a beginning and space, time, and matter came into existence from a point of origin. But we do not know that this point of origin is God. Calling it God is to make a false assumption. Another reason for the existence of everything might simply be that other dimensions had the power and the marvelousness and complexity to create a situation where where the Big Bang could be brought into existence and space, time, and matter begin to exist without an intelligent designer having a hand.
Well, Carter, what you just described there is what we would call God. God is in another dimension that has the ability to bring these dimensions into existence. So if you want to call it another dimension, you can call it that. But that's exactly what we mean by God.
But then why is there a theology? Why do we worship God? He could easily be called another.
Excellent point. You don't have to worship God. In fact, Aristotle never worshiped God. In fact, the Greeks never got their theology and philosophy together. They knew that there had to be an unmoved mover, but they never put the two together and worshiped the unmoved mover. So you don't have to worship the unmoved mover. You don't have to. You can do whatever you want. That's why you have free will. God loves you enough to give you free will. You can love him or reject him. That's up to you.
But on that point, you do have the free will to accept or reject God, but the obvious conclusion is that rejection of God will lead to eternal damnation in hell. So in reality, we do not really have the choice to accept or not to accept God. We must ultimately accept God, assuming we choose to avoid perdition.
There's only two possibilities if God exists. In eternity, you're going to be with him or you're not going to be with him. Right? That's logically the only two options. If you want to be with him, you will seek him out and be with him. If you don't want to be with him, God will not force you into his presence against your will. In fact, let me make the objection stronger than what you're making it. You're very polite, but I debated an atheist who was a little bit more direct. And let me tell you, this man he's a good man. I like him. His name is Eddie Tabash. He's an attorney from Beverly Hills. We debated at the University of Michigan a number of months ago. And he looked at me during the Q&A and he said, Frank, my mother was a survivor of the Holocaust. She lived an awful life. Somebody presented her with the gospel and she rejected it. Is she in hell right now? Whoa. I said, Eddie, I don't know where your mother is. I don't know if she made a profession of faith in her last moments, but if she didn't, then God will not force her into his presence against her will. God is too loving for that. And I asked the audience this question. In fact, I'll ask you as an audience this question. Ladies, is there anybody in here who's ever had a man pursue you and you did not want that man to pursue you? You did not want to date him. Anyone in here? Of course. In fact, some of you are going, yeah, he's sitting right next to me right now. He won't leave me alone. I said, okay, ladies, suppose this man continues to pursue you and continues to pursue you. And you say, look, I only like you as a friend. Ladies, why don't you just take the knife, stick it in, and turn it? Because every man in here has heard this. I like you, but only as a friend. Well, suppose he continues to pursue you, and he gets to the point where he says, look, I love you so much, I'm going to force you to love me. Can he do that? No, he can't do that. Love, by definition, must be freely given. So if he truly did love you, what would he do? He would leave you alone. That's exactly what God does. He keeps sending us cards, letters, and flowers while we're here. And if we keep rejecting him, he gives us up to our own desires. And that ultimately what hell is. Hell is separation from God. So you're free in hell. You can continue to reject God in hell, but you're confined to hell. In fact, hell is a quarantine of evil. That's what it is. And heaven, of course, is being in the very presence of God. God loves you too much to force you into his presence against your will. Thanks, Carter.
Hello, I'm Nathaniel.
Nathaniel.
No, so you make three specific arguments for the existence of God. A creative argument, an argument for design, and an argument for morality. I, first off, would like to try and take down the argument on morality.
Go ahead.
Because it's not actually an argument for the existence of a God, it's the argument for the fact that we should have an idea of an existence of a God, because otherwise there would be no moral basis from which we could sit on. And I disagree with that because I feel that humans are inherently altruistic and moral.
Okay, all right, stop there for just a second, Nathaniel. What do you mean by altruistic and moral?
We are giving and we care about each other.
Why is that good?
Why is that good? Because it helps our species survive.
Why is it good to survive?
Because then we can propagate and move on as a species and continue to exist.
So why is that a good thing? Who said?
Why is that a good thing?
Yeah.
Because that is what it is.
Well, that's an is. That's not an ought, though. Stalin would say, fine, Nathaniel, I'm going to survive by killing you and taking your stuff. Why is he wrong?
Because Stalin would have the initial urge not to. He would feel that the inherent urge of humans is to be caring for one another. There are situations where humans will not be caring about one another, and those are exceptional. But because humans are inherently altruistic, his first urge would be to take care of the person or try and help them. But if he has some motivation against that, then he would no longer have that urge, and he would decide that he wants to kill them because he has a reason to.
Well, again, I think you're begging the question as to what altruism is. Why is taking care of others a good thing if there is no God? That's your opinion. Is there an external referent, an authoritative, unchanging referent that you're getting that opinion from, which makes it objective, or is it just something you feel?
Humans, so if you take it from the stance that this is something that is consistent throughout humanity, that we care about one another, then we could superpose that as a moral impulse that we have.
Okay, let me agree with you. I think we do have a moral impulse. And that's exactly what C.S. Lewis said in The Abolition of Man, when he looked at all the diverse cultures and he said, they agree on basic morality. Now, how do you explain that basic morality? Well, there's maybe different ways to explain it, but some will say that's because God has written it on our hearts. But the issue isn't how we know it. The issue is, why is altruism, as you put it, or caring for one another a good thing? Who said?
It's not necessarily who said, it is what is. We are altruistic. There is no need for someone to say that it is a good thing. It is what we are.
But if Hitler or Stalin comes along and says, I don't want to be altruistic, I want to be selfish and take everything for myself, and if I have to kill you to do that, I'm going to do that, why is that objectively wrong?
Because he is not taking care of other people.
Who said it's... Where are you getting this standard to this objective standard that you ought to take care of people? Where does that come from if there's no God?
So I'm just going to talk about a little example that I know of and some others. So there's 3 different points I'd like to make. First off, we still exist. If we did not take care of each other as a social species, we would have very, very limited capabilities of still existing. So we need to band together. We need to take care of each other. We need to be friendly to one another.
That's presupposing that survival is a good thing. Why is it a good thing? And why us surviving? Why not roaches? Or antelope? Or black widow spiders?
Why do you need the concept of good there? We're still surviving, and we're being nice, kind to each other. We are being caring for one another.
Forgive me, Nathaniel, but you're stealing the standard of goodness from God's universe to try and make your worldview work. But if there is no objective, authoritative moral standard beyond us, then atheism doesn't work.
You know, I think you're right. There is something to that. The idea of good and evil is in a lot of ways a religious concept.
My question to you is one that I ask to anybody when I'm talking about religion. And it's to address a huge paradox I see that nobody seems to worry about. So you are presumably very confident in your views. You are not at all concerned that you might be wrong.
I could be wrong. That's why I continue to read and continue to search.
All right,
but I'm not God. I could be wrong.
You are still very confident in your ideology and your belief system. You are very confident. I mean, I'm assuming since you're up here on a stage, you've written a book. If I walk into any given room, maybe not this one, I will find people that follow Islam. I will find people that are Jewish. I will find people that follow Hinduism. A number of religions, and there have been something like over 500, probably way more, religions in history that have all come and gone. Each of these followers of these various religions is utterly confident that they are correct, that their book has the word, the final word, the word of the Creator, and they will all point to, in my book, this is something that actually happened, this is something that actually happened, this is something that actually happened, so therefore everything is correct, my book is right, I know I'm right. All of these people in the same room are utterly confident that they're correct and the other people are wrong. And to me it seems like a blatant paradox, because I'm assuming you would agree that only one religion can be correct.
Well, if they're
Would you agree with that?
If they're contradictory, only one or the other's right or neither are right.
Okay, yes. All right. So my question to you is, how do you address that paradox that all these followers of different religions, including yourself, are very, very confident in their views, enough to be able to assert that people in other belief systems are wrong?
Well, it's not a paradox, Nick. It's just the way truth works.
No, it is a paradox. In that all these people, they're not willing to address the fact that the other people across the table are equally confident. They're equally certain.
What do you mean by paradox? Maybe I'm misunderstanding what you mean by that.
I mean that only 5 people at a table, each of them has a book. They're all saying I'm the one that's right because my book said so. How do you address that?
Well, you look at the evidence. That's what you do. That's what we're trying to do here. Just like if I were to say 4 times 4 equaled 15, and you said, well, Frank, 4 times 4 equaled 16 rather than 15, you would be right and I'd be wrong. And if everybody else thought it was some other number than 16, they would be wrong too, right?
Okay, yes, that's correct. But so what types of information then do you use? Again, I'm not familiar. I haven't read your book.
Have you been in here for this presentation?
I have not. I came in late. I'm just curious if...
Oh, well...
So, I mean, that's probably what the presentation was about.
Hey, you guys want to hang out another 70 minutes? Huh?
All right, I mean, that's fair
Nick,
enough.
you came in really late, brother.
No, that's fair.
Hey, I'll tell you what we just did is we went through 4 questions. Does truth exist? Does God exist? Are miracles possible? And is the New Testament reliable, particularly about the resurrection of Christ? If truth exists, in other words, there is truth, and you would agree with there's truth, if God exists, if there's a being beyond the world who created and sustains the world, if miracles are possible, and we said they were because the greatest miracle has already occurred, the creation of the universe out of nothing, then if Jesus rose from the dead after he predicted it, if he really did rise from the dead, then what we call mere Christianity, C.S. Lewis would call it, the basic essentials of Christianity, are true. And that's what we were talking about here tonight.
Okay, I mean, I'm sure we would disagree on a lot of those former points, but I did miss a lot of the presentation.
I'll tell you what, if I were to give you a book, would you read it?
If you would read a book.
If I would give you a book. If you would read one of my
suggestions too, I'm not going to, if we could trade books and you'd read one of my recommendations, I would absolutely be down.
I'm giving you my book, not a recommended book.
Of course you'd give me your book.
A book that my mom would recommend.
Your mom would recommend it because she's your mother.
She would recommend my book. Would you read it?
My mother would recommend all of my papers I've written as well. I'm telling you, if you want to ask me to read a book, I will give you a book as well. And if you want to make a deal,
what book will you give me?
I would give you The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins.
I've already read it.
Okay, and I'm...
Okay, now let me ask you a question, Nick. Nick, can I ask you a question?
Yes, absolutely.
Richard Dawkins believes there is no God, right?
Yes.
And he believes everybody who disagrees with him is wrong.
Just as you believe anybody who doesn't.
So what's the paradox?
The paradox is that only one of these people at the table can be correct.
True.
I mean that...
You're saying that Richard Dawkins is right. I'm saying he's wrong. I'm saying that my view is closer to the truth than his.
And the other significant difference in that situation, though, is that Richard Dawkins is not making an affirmative claim. He's not saying that something exists.
Oh, sure he is.
He's not.
Richard Dawkins is saying that materialism's true, that macroevolution is true, that there are no objective moral values.
You're pulling me into other areas of Richard Dawkins' belief systems. I'm only here to discuss whether or not there is a divine creator, a God. You can talk about all these things that Richard Dawkins has said. The way I can pull atheism out of that paradox is by saying that all these people at the table, the metaphorical table I'm describing, are claiming that something exists, something that is mutually exclusive with everything else at that table. Someone like Richard Dawkins would say that there is no reason to believe in any of these claims being made. Not that... For example, I was speaking with somebody earlier, and one common argument I use, people will say, how can you be so confident that there is no God? They'll ask me that, you're saying this, but you're saying there is no God. It's not necessarily that I'm saying that there cannot be one, right? Do you believe in leprechauns? Can I ask you for an answer?
I haven't seen any evidence for leprechauns.
So you don't believe in them?
No, I don't.
Okay, do you believe in fairies? You don't believe in those, right?
Nick, but you see, the God of the Bible is not like a being inside the universe, like a fairy or Thor.
It's not about whether it's a being, or it's about the fact that it's a claim, right? It's a truth claim.
Right.
You don't believe in these things
right.
because there is no sufficient. Sufficient meaning stands the test of logic.
Okay.
Empiricism.
Hold on, Nick.
Go ahead.
Hold on. Okay. Whether fairies exist or not is not a logical claim. It's an ontological, evidentiary claim. Okay, same thing is true with God. It's totally logical that fairies and leprechauns could exist. It has nothing to do with logic. It has to do with is there evidence that such things exist?
It might be a semantic error I'm making.
Okay, yes. So Richard Dawkins says, at a scale of 1 to 7, with 1 being I know there's a God and 7 I know there's no God, he says I'm a 6.5. To his credit, he says that he's not absolutely certain that God doesn't exist, just like I can't be absolutely certain God does exist. I could be wrong, okay? But he is saying that everybody who disagrees with him in his view is wrong. He's saying the same thing everybody is saying when they make a truth claim.
Absolutely.
It's not a paradox to make a truth claim.
So, you have nothing, and suddenly you have something. I'm convinced that takes a creator. That takes some type of supernatural being to bring something out of nothing. And I am convinced also that it takes an intelligent mind to put matter together and energy together in such a way that you got life. The idea that that just happens by chance, there's no evidence to support that.
I mean, there is evidence. You can take just a certain amount of chemicals that would just happen to be laying around, and if they're collected together in such a way, and the universe is a huge superset, so like there's a bunch of possibilities that could happen. Like you can see that these things take on lifelike characteristics. So yeah, I would say it is possible.
Yep.
Maybe unlikely, but it is possible.
Yep. And it's possible that I could wake up in the morning with $1 million in my right pocket.
You could.
I could. But if I base my life on that, I would argue I'm being very stupid.
You would, but at the same time, you're not taking into account how massive the universe is. Like when you study probability, if you say that the works of if you do random letters, the works of Shakespeare is going to come up in the first 1,000 letters, you're kind of a fool. But one of the things about probability you understand is, given enough time, every works of Shakespeare will come up in the exact order that it was written.
Good, okay.
And the universe, I believe, is huge enough, massive on a scale that it's hard to even like imagine that certain chemicals could just happen to come together and bring about lifelike properties.
But if you believe in the Big Bang, you know that the universe doesn't have eternity to produce life. You know that the universe came about 15 billion years ago. So you've got a limited amount of time, 15 billion years, for life to come about by chance. Now, if you and I and someone else are playing poker, and I'm dealing, and 10 times in a row, I deal a perfect hand to myself, if you begin to say, Cliff, I think you're cheating, that's impossible for you to deal 10 hands, all perfect for yourself. And if I say to you, there are multiple numbers of universes, and we just happen to live in the universe where I can deal 10 perfect hands of poker for myself, I think you'll, if you're a Texan, be reaching for your 6-shooter to blow me away for taking all your money away from you. I don't think you're going to say, oh yeah, right, there are a multiple number of universes, there's an infinite amount of time, so I buy the line that you can deal 10 perfect hands of poker cards to yourself in a row. I think you know that that is highly implausible, and what is far more plausible is, I'm cheating you out of your money.
No, I agree. It is possible that you dealt yourself 10 perfect hands. I would never say that, oh, you dealt yourself 10 perfect hands, you were cheating, definitely, without a doubt. I would have some kind of investigation. I would probably check your sleeves and stuff like that and gather some more evidence. I'm not just going to, like, blindly accuse you. That would be unfair.
All right. Let's say I dealt 50 perfect hands of cards.
Once again, possible.
Really? How about 100?
Possible.
How about 200?
Possible.
Okay. I don't think you can live your life that way.
I try to.
You can't.
I try.
Prove to me that this fine university is going to give you a diploma on your day of graduation. Prove to me that on your day of graduation, this fine university is not going to say, hey, we're going to break tradition. No diplomas this year. Can you prove that?
I can't prove it. I have a pretty good idea of what they're going to do, though.
Good. You see, sir, you don't base your life on proof. You base your life on evidence.
I agree.
And you cannot get irrevocable, watertight proof. As a thinking human being, you base your life on evidence. That's what I do. I think that's what the majority of us do who treasure our minds. We're not so naive to think I can prove something. Rather, we look for evidence, and then we ask ourselves, what is most plausible? What is most reasonable in light of the evidence? I can't prove God exists. I can't even prove I exist. Maybe I'm just a bad dream you're having. It is possible. But the overwhelming evidence is I do exist, and the overwhelming evidence is, in a different way, God exists. Not the proof, but the evidence.
Okay, so what is the evidence for God?
The evidence for God is design demands a designer. 100 times out of 100 in my experience of life, a delicious meal points to a chef. A shirt points to a tailor. Mount Rushmore does not point to water dripping down over rocks and carving out George and Teddy and Thomas's face. 100 times out of 100, the BMW points to a mechanic. The building points to an architect and a builder. Never in my observation do you get order and design by chance. It demands a designer. Second piece of evidence. The fact that if oxygen comprised 25% of this atmosphere, fires would erupt all over the place. If it comprised 15%, we'd all suffocate. The fact that it comprises 21%, which is exactly what allows us to sustain life, demands some type of intelligent mind. That type of precision, that we have a life-sustaining planet instead of a life-defeating planet, demands some type of intelligent mind. Thirdly, the amount of densely packed information in a single cell, the DNA of a single cell, demands some type of intelligent mind for me. If you and I are walking up and down the beach and we come to ripples in the sand, and you say, hey, Cliff, how'd those ripples get there? And I say, obviously because of the waves. That's cool. We keep walking down, we see in the sand, John loves Mary. You say, hey, Cliff, how'd that get there? And I say, obviously the waves. Why is that ridiculous? Because densely packed information in the message, John loves Mary, cannot come about as a result of the waves washing over the sand. It demands an intelligent mind. So there's more information in the DNA of a single cell than there's information in 3 sets of the 30-volume Encyclopedia Britannica. It points me to some type of intelligent mind. So those are 3 pieces of evidence that point to God. I could keep going, but why don't you speak now?
Okay, first I want to go ahead and about the one about the Earth being like a perfect place to inhabit life. We've found hundreds of planets in our galaxy, in the tiny little space in our galaxy, that have the same same type of atmosphere, same size planet, all that kind of stuff. We've found planets that have the same kind of properties that Earth has, Earth-like planets. Okay, so it's not that out of the ordinary for Earth to just pop up out of nowhere. Do you want to refute that, or?
Well, yeah, first of all, I'd love to find out about where these other planets are that are life-sustaining like Earth is. I'm just interested, curious.
I'm not saying they're sustaining life, I'm saying they're life-like. Or they're Earth-like. Like you're saying, like, there's 21% oxygen, a bunch of nitrogen, all that kind of stuff. We found planets that have that same kind of makeup.
But isn't it true that I would never want you to take your spacesuit off if you're on that planet?
I mean, if we study the atmosphere, we notice the atmosphere is like Earth. We could probably just take our helmets off. Be cool.
Really?
Yeah, that's why we say they're Earth-like planets. We can't get to them yet. Obviously.
Where are these planets? Where are these planets?
They're in our galaxy, a very small sliver of our galaxy we've been able to study. We have found these planets.
All right, great. That still doesn't change my point that when you study how life is balanced on a razor's edge on this planet, it demands an intelligent mind. I don't care how many planets there are out there that have similar. I would argue those planets have been created that way as well then, if they're life-sustaining. I mean, if you can go onto those planets and suck wind the way you do on here and live, and have the whole life process continue on, it's incredible. Because please don't go to the moon and take your helmet off.
I will, I promise.
Good.
But I'm just saying, like, you say that life balanced on a razor edge. Life as we know it, our carbon-based life forms, as we know it, as humans, as tigers and bugs and all that kind of stuff, they require this type of atmosphere. That doesn't mean other life can require some kind of extreme atmosphere.
I agree.
So why are you saying life balanced on a razor's edge when it could definitely be on a much wider range?
Well, the whole point is, your life and my life cannot be sustained on a planet where oxygen comprises 30% of the atmosphere. Fires would break out all over the place. We'd all burn to death. And if oxygen comprised 10% of our atmosphere, we'd all suffocate. So, I mean, it is so precise. I mean, think about Jupiter. The gravitational field of Jupiter sucks in all these comets and asteroids headed straight to smack planet Earth. It's an amazing vacuum cleaner, Jupiter is, and it protects us in an amazing way. Think about if the Earth spun more quickly on its axis. There wouldn't be life as we know it on this planet. So, I mean, the amazing balance of nature that sustains life, it demands some type of intelligent mind, doesn't it?
It sustains our life, but I mean, it doesn't require an intelligent mind. I'm just saying, what makes our life so special that it has to balance on that razor's edge?
All right. I have a brother who's a transplant surgeon. He transplants kidneys and livers down at Emory University Hospital, or over at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta. I can promise you, sir, he has gone through the most stringent academic courses in order to be able to transplant livers and kidneys. And if you need a liver transplant, I would encourage you not to go to someone who lives down on the drag to have them transplant. I would encourage you instead to turn to someone who has studied the amazing, intricate order and design of the human body and who can pull off that transplant in such a way that you're going to live instead of die of kidney or liver failure. Now, people love to say to me, oh, there's not that much order and design in the human body. See, the reason that I almost feel like calling them either inconsistent or an intellectual hypocrite is because you know very, very well that if you get sick enough, you're not going down to someone on the drag for help. You're going to the most highly trained doctor you can possibly find who understands the order and design of your body and who can correct the disorder that has occurred. That's my point.
Okay, that doesn't tell me why our life is special, why it has to hang on that razor's edge. You're saying our life is complicated to understand for us. You think a worm understands how its heart beats?
What does that have to do with anything we've been talking about?
Okay, it could be very complex to us how we have to go to school for 10 plus years to understand how to do a liver transplant. How do we know there's not something else that just looks at us like, oh, hey, look, idiots trying to take out their liver again. And they can just do it as soon as they're born. And it's the same relative step from a worm to human to some other kind of life.
All right. If you have liver failure, I can promise you, you're not going to look at me and say it's relative. If you have liver failure and if you're on your way out of here, you know very, very well that you need a new liver in order to live.
I agree.
And you're going to have a doctor do that transplant who has studied very carefully the order and design of the human body. You're not just going to let anybody mess with your liver, I hope.
I understand that, but I'm just saying, maybe we're not as smart as we think we are.
Oh, I agree with that. We are definitely not as smart as we think we are. A bunch of us are intellectual, arrogant twits. There's no question about it. But, sir, you can't deny the fact that there is amazing, intricate order and design to the human body. And you prove that you realize that when you don't go to the person on the strip to heal you. You go to a hospital. You go to the most highly trained doctor you can possibly get. Why? Because this thing is intricate. Really intricate. All right. Does intricate order and design come about by chance?
I don't think it's necessarily that complex, us. Like I'm saying, we could be the simplest, we could be very simple. Like, we only think it's complex, that's all we know. It's the most complex thing or one of the most complex things we've been able to study. There's still so much we don't know about the universe. Like, we only know about 5% of what the universe is made of.
Uh-huh.
The other stuff is just blind. We have no idea what it is.
Right.
We call it dark energy, dark matter. Nothing to do with energy, man, nothing to do with matter. We just call it that because why not?
Okay.
So the fact that we can only understand tiny little percentage of the universe, something we haven't even seen, we just think like, hey, this is what 5% of the universe is probably made up of.
Right.
Lets me know that we may not know what we're talking about all the time.
Okay. Okay, now just listen to what you're saying. And now consider me answering your question, why do I believe God exists, by saying, we know so little of all there is to reality, God must exist. I cannot live my life that way.
I'm glad.
I cannot do what you're doing to me, which is, we know so little that we got to just say God doesn't exist, because we got to realize that science is eventually going to be able to answer all our questions. That, for me, is intellectual dishonesty. Yes, we agree. We don't know everything. We know less than 1% of all there is to know, I'm convinced. But we got to do the best job we can with the evidence we have. We've got to use not these genius minds we have, but these amazing minds to look for evidence and then to ask ourselves what is most reasonable, what is most plausible, not what can we prove, but what is most reasonable, what is most plausible in light of the evidence. Okay, so I think we've moved from atheism to agnosticism, right? Okay, now, here's my problem with agnosticism. It's impossible to live out. What does that mean? Tonight, you will put your head on your pillow, I'll put my head on my pillow. Like it or not, you're living for something, I'm living for something. In other words, we have motive, we have ambition, we have priorities, we have drives and desires. Okay, now all you got to do is take your motives, push them back to their origin, and you'll find out what you worship. In other words, what you consider ultimately worthy. If you consider money ultimately worthy, you will get the best education you have, very specifically to make the most money you can. If you value education as ultimately worthy, you will live for your rational mind to be the most brilliant postdoc student you can be, and professor or whatever. If you live for physical pleasure, if that's the bottom line for you, then you will be the classic hedonist, and you'll live to stimulate your nerve endings. But you see, my question is, what's the evidence that the ultimate purpose of life is to make money, to have pleasure, to be smart? Now, Jesus says the ultimate purpose in life is to love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. And you can use money, and you can enjoy sex within the context of a lifelong commitment, and you are responsible to use your rational mind because it's a precious gift from God, so you better not dabble in the irrational. You better think hard and straight. And you see, that worldview makes so much more sense than the options. But the idea that you can go to sleep and say, well, I don't believe anything's worth living for, means that you will not get up tomorrow morning. Which is why Albert Camus, the great atheistic existentialist philosopher, pointed out, the only question modern man must answer is, why not commit suicide? In other words, why get up tomorrow morning if life is ultimately meaningless? But you see, obviously, you're going to create some meaning. All right, we all do, right? Or else we accept the fact that God created us for a purpose. So you see, the question then that I have for you is, what are you living for? And then secondly, what is this overwhelming evidence that convinces you that whatever it is you're living for is reliable?
Well, I would say that I don't believe there is like an ultimate meaning in the first place, so I can choose my own way to live.
Right.
And if it's relative, then there's nothing you can say that's wrong.
Correct. Which means tomorrow morning when you get up, if you figure out how to steal money from people, or if you figure out how to help hurting people, it ultimately doesn't matter, because it's whatever you choose, right? Okay, now, if you begin to think about that deeply enough, you begin to realize, whoa, this life is a crapshoot. And then you have to struggle with despair. And you see, what so concerns me is exactly what concerned Friedrich Nietzsche, that there are so many people who think that life is meaningless, but they think, let's have a great time today. They never have the intellectual courage to say, why shouldn't I commit suicide? Why should I continue living? Now, my point is not that you have to commit suicide. That was not Camus' point. But the point is, if that's what you believe about reality, then I want to watch you live it out.